Hello and welcome to the Stiles Council, the podcast that is officially this week excited for the World Cup. Joining me is Chris Nee. Chris, hello.
Hello.
Yesterday, I had a real moment. Where I realised, I just had a glorious little 5 minutes where I realised there's a World Cup in the summer. And you know when all those feelings just come rushing into you just for 5 minutes? It was bloody glorious. We can be excited now, can't we?
Yeah, we can. Was that when we talked about Gaza for no reason?
Possibly. That might have had something to do with it. But no, I think it's the week the Sticker album's coming out. I was looking at the fixtures yesterday. I was listening to Waka Waka by Shakira with Bo, my daughter. It was just, suddenly I realised it's only a bloody World Cup this summer. And suddenly I realised how difficult it is going to be to not be excited for Qatar in a couple of years. But that's a whole other subject. We're going to go straight into our news section because we've got a little bit of ground to cover this week. And there is, of course, a headline story, Chris, and that is the injury to Harry Kane.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a World Cup year without England's most important player facing a race against time for an injury recovery, would it? If we had before Rooney, Gerrard, Gareth Barry, that was an important one. And now, of course, we've got Harry Kane. And the noise from Spurs would suggest that it's a 4-week injury. It's an ankle ligament problem he picked up in a challenge with, it was Begovic, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
It's obviously, I don't think that even the most optimistic England fan could make it into a good thing. It is not a good thing, not least because both you and I have been very clear that it's impossible with Harry Kane that England won't win the World Cup this year. It could, however, be a blessing in disguise, Dave. Could it not?
Yeah, this is, we're bringing an off-air conversation onto air here, aren't we? And this is purely the school of thought which we both cautiously subscribe to, I think, which is that Harry Kane is going to be absolutely brilliant for England at the World Cup, as we all know. But there is quite a strong case that against better sides that don't play as deep as somebody like Panama will, Jamie Vardy could be actually the better option, depending how England play.
He's in nifty form, Vardy, and I can see the argument for certain games. And there are so many different styles of team look very vulnerable to the way Vardy plays and the way teams play with Vardy. And I think with Kane getting a rest, which we'll loosely call it, going into the World Cup with Vardy in form and Kane, not having played every week for the past 4 years, could work in our favour. Now, it totally relies on Kane recovering quickly and fully from that injury and being refreshed. But yeah, it's nice to have the option.
I was doing a little bit of research into this because obviously this is the same ankle he has injured twice previously, which is a worry, doing it so close to the World Cup. But his recovery from said injuries is essentially complete and pretty good right from the off. I am loath to say there is a chance that this is a dream scenario for England, whereby we've got our best player having a nice break before going into the World Cup, because it is an injury. He will need to play his way back into form and fitness. But the noises from Spurs are he's going to have probably at least 2 or 3 games before the end of the season. And that's going to lead into 3 or 4 England friendlies before the World Cup. I'm cautiously optimistic that for once this might have gone our way.
Yeah, let's not pretend that Jamie Vardy isn't capable of tearing Tunisia and Panama a new one as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing is with England, we have, some of the things you mentioned, some of the players you mentioned in the past, the Rooney stuff was ridiculous. The put your hands on, the Beckham and Rooney stuff in particular, put your hands on the picture of a metatarsal in the paper, etc., was just a joke. But when we've when we've gone into major tournaments and we have been absolutely desperately waiting on the likes of Gareth Barry and Joe Cole as well, if you remember. In their absence, these players suddenly become England's version of Lionel Messi, and I just think the point we're both making, and that is worth making, is that England do have options for once.
Yeah.
And as brilliant, as outstanding as Harry Kane is, there is a dislikable but brilliant backup.
There is, and I don't think Vardy wins us the World Cup, and I think there's absolutely not a shadow of possibility that Kane doesn't. So let's hope he's back in time.
Yeah,
we're joking, by the way.
Another news story before we get to the other headline of the week, which is of course the announcement of the latest squad. But is the retirement from professional football of Michael Carrick at the end of the season. Chris, first England cap in 2001, 34 since. For a player of Michael Carrick's quality, and for an international team, England's quality in that time, 34 is just nowhere near enough, is it?
It's not. We have a tendency in England to call these players central midfielders, and that is that. So Carrick was in competition, amongst many other excellent midfielders of different styles, with Gerrard and Lampard. So I'm inclined to say that England throughout, Carrick's the peak of Carrick's career, slightly missed a trick with him, because I can't think of too many players who play in a role that's so important as well as Carrick has for Man United. And I think the closest I can think of is Owen Hargreaves. And, stylistically, even he was quite different.
Yeah, the thing about Hargreaves is England like to think of their midfielders as a defensive midfielder, a traditional central midfielder, or an attacking midfielder. And if you don't fit in one of those three boxes comfortably, there's rarely a place for you in England's system. And the thing about Michael Carrick is he very much evolved his game over his career, and at his very best for Man United, I would almost say he was the role that David Beckham coveted for quite a long time, which is that deeper lying playmaker type role. Yeah, which he tried in that one game, and it consisted for David Beckham of bombing 45-yard balls out to Sean Wright-Phillips every 5 minutes. But Carrick, as I said, at his very best for Man United, he used to sit there quite happy to break play up, quite happy to play the simple pass, but also very capable of doing something different. And it just feels like a shame we never found a way to use him properly, doesn't it?
It does. I think we are very bad at recognising players who aren't fashionable. And I say that as a Football Association system and as supporters. We weren't out there shouting for Carrick to be involved in the England team more regularly. And maybe we should have been. Because he serves a specific role for England. And there were more glamorous, more exciting, more goal-scoring players who were ahead of him in the pecking order. Yeah. And in a straight pecking order, they probably belonged there. But in a system where you have to get players playing alongside one another, 34 seems far too few caps. I find it difficult to see how someone who came through where he came through and then made his move to Man United. So, there's a wealth of Premier League experience there. He's played more than 300 league games for Manchester United. That is a midfielder who plays for England, typically. So I think if you checked the stats against other English central midfielders who've played that many times for that little clutch of elite clubs in the Premier League, they will have played plenty of times for England. And I think the only way we can rectify this is to make sure he gets another testimonial, because that was good.
I want to move on to the squad, but I think the last thing I'd say on Carrick, he's a player I've got an enormous amount of time for. I don't think there's anything more sort of fitting in terms of how England have sort of approached midfield roles that a player who has won the Premier League 5 times, the FA Cup once, the League Cup 3 times, 5 Charity Shields, a Champions League and a Europa Cup only got 34 caps. That pretty much sums up England's approach sometimes, but never mind. The squad. I'm going to save the goalkeepers to last for a reason. But I'm going to run through them, Chris, by position.
Okay.
Or normally by position. Okay. So we've got the squad to face Holland and Italy in the friendlies. It does have the feeling of a friendly squad right before an international tournament, in that please do not get our big players injured while on England duty. But defenders, Kyle Walker, Kieran Trippier, Ryan Bertrand, Danny Rose, John Stones, James Tarkowski, Alfie Mawson, Joe Gomez, Harry Maguire, and even though he was officially listed as a midfielder, I'm going to sling Ashley Young back into that defender bracket. I saw a lot of negativity around this group of players, Chris, and I actually feel quite the other way. So I wonder where you sit on it.
Well, I look at the omissions, really, and who's really missing defensively. What have we got? Gary Cahill, not playing. Chris Smalling. And Jamal Lascelles, I think, is the one. You know, he's the conversation here. As
Lewis Dunk. Lewis Dunk.
Well,
Lewis Dunk.
Yeah, I will bow to your greater knowledge in that area, but you are the first person I've seen mention him. You're not. I think it's kind of more interesting to find out who is out that should be in, and I really don't think there's a massive case for too many of those, which is why the conversation is moved on instead to Mawson and Tarkowski. Both of whom are in decent form, you know.
Tarkowski in particular, I would say. Mawson is Mawson is doing okay in a side that often haven't been this season. But Tarkowski, I think, obviously, they sold Michael Keane to Everton in the summer, and that was seen as a massive loss to Burnley. Tarkowski's come in, and, I mean, he's barely put a foot wrong, has he, Chris?
No, he hasn't. But Burnley are punching above their weight in the Premier League, and they are prone to a wobble here and there. No, they don't go on long runs without having some losses. But that's a side that's built on, not unattractive functionality. Yeah, and a lot of that is being defensively solid. And when you have a team in Burnley's position in the Premier League that arguably on the strength of its attacking talent shouldn't be there, it's absolutely within the realms of good practice to take a proper look at their defenders. And one of the things I would absolutely trust Gareth Southgate to do is to be able to spot as a defender.
Yeah. I mean, the three, I think John Stones is nailed on to start in the middle in the World Cup. I think we probably both agree on that, unless something goes massively wrong.
Yep.
In these two friendlies, I would certainly like to see him with Maguire again, who I think he's not the quickest defender in the world. There's no getting away from that. But I think he has got that natural instinct in terms of space, in terms of player awareness. So I'd certainly like to see him there. And I would like to, I think Tarkowski is ahead of Mawson for my money.
Yes, I think so.
I would like to see him be given a shirt. I really would. Similarly, Trippier and Bertrand, I think, are both in there absolutely on merit, and 100%. Deserve to be looked at. So I've seen a lot of negativity, and I sort of put this down to, I was thinking about this, Chris. We'll come on to this at some point. We've been spoilt defender wise, haven't we? When you look at some of the England defenders in recent history, from Sol Campbell to Rio Ferdinand to he who shall not be named, whose name might also rhyme with Bo Berry.
We like him now, though.
Yeah, because he's a Villa player, obviously. But Ledley King, Woodgate, Southgate. Yeah, we were leaving central defenders at home who would walk into this team. So I look at that and I think, well, yeah, let's have a look. Let's have a look. And I'm convinced. I'm very much part of the crew that thinks one day Harry Maguire is going to be playing for one of those top 4 sides. So I think, keep going there. But absolutely have a look at Tarkowski. I think it's been brilliant this season. Midfielders, Eric Dyer, Jordan Henderson, Jake Livermore, Adam Lallana, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Dele Alli, Raheem Sterling, Jesse Lingard. Again, do you put them as midfielders or forwards? Lewis Cook and Jack Wilshere. I have feelings and thoughts, Chris. How about you?
I would like England's midfield batch to be better than this. I'm not completely convinced that it is. So, again, really, I don't know how much differently Southgate could have done this. It slightly grates on me that we're looking at Jack Wilshere to be at his very best. I think he's shown it in flashes for Arsenal again this season, but I just don't trust him to be Jack Wilshere all the time.
Yeah.
And elsewhere, I think we have, again, a fairly uninspiring but perfectly serviceable midfield group. I'm a fan of Adam Lallana, or I was until that weird sending off for the Stiffs at Liverpool.
That was such a strange
I'd
incident.
love to know the background to the rest of that game. I really would.
Yeah, there was something had happened there. But speaking of his Liverpool colleagues, look, Oxlade-Chamberlain has played his way back on there in merit. The last month or so, he has been very good for Liverpool.
Yeah, I wrote him off
no
as
getting
well.
away from that.
Completely.
But I've spoke to you about Jordan Henderson before. My issue with Jordan Henderson is not that he's a bad midfielder. It's just that every single aspect of his game, to my mind, is average. He hasn't got any weak spots at all. He just hasn't got any particular strong spots. He's just, 6 or 7 out of 10 midfielder. I can understand them bringing Wilshere back to have a look. I get that.
Yep.
Dyer, yeah, fair enough. Jake Livermore is disappointing, but you look and you think, well, we haven't got a midfielder who's better than Jake Livermore. So
yeah, this is it, Dave. Livermore is the one who symbolises the issue to me. I quite like Jake Livermore. I think he's a decent player, but I don't think he should be in the England squad.
Yeah, the problem with Jake Livermore...
I don't mean specifically this one, because I think on balance he possibly should be in this one. But there are hundreds of Jake Livermores out there.
Jake Livermore's good games are very, very good.
Yeah.
But the problem is his bad games are extremely bad. So if you were relying on him in a World Cup, you would be worried. The name I want to talk about, because I'm gonna shove Sterling, Alli and Lingard forward. I'm very pleased to see Lewis Cook in there, who is a player that I really think has got a big future. And I think I wouldn't say he's going under the radar because he's playing Premier League football. He's on Match of the Day every week, Chris. But he really looks like he's got a chance of kicking on and becoming something very special. Have you seen much of him?
Not that much, to be honest. A little bit for Bournemouth and a little bit for England's underage sides. And I think that is a real positive, that he can do what he's done in an England shirt and be rewarded with a spot in the senior squad. That is the path that we should be opening up to these players.
I think that is the path, but I think it's also important to say even if that hadn't been the pathway, he is there on merit. He has been, again, he's another player who's been very, very good in a team that often haven't been. And I'll take over slightly because I have seen a bit of him. He is one player in the future, going into those Euros in 2 years' time. If he keeps progressing as he is, I can very much see an England side where he is a regular in there. It's quite exciting to me. Would I take him to the World Cup? I don't know, but would I possibly take him to the World Cup if one of the places was going to be taken by Jake Livermore? I think I would,
I think I would. If he's going into the Euros at 23 years old, I'd rather he had a World Cup under his belt.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't play.
And that's exactly it. I go back to the point I've made before, I think even on this podcast, Chris, about Germany taking Mario Götze to the 2010 World Cup, knowing he wouldn't play, and I think he only ended up playing about 30 minutes, if that, which was like off the bench at the end of a dead rubber. But it was to get him used to the environment and being there. Lewis Cook is a player who's got, particularly with England's options now, who has got an outside chance of being in there for 10 to 12 years. So I would take him. But forwards.
Yeah, but sorry, before you do forwards, Dave, is there a case for Mark Albright in here?
It depends how you play.
Yeah, I don't know how we would use him.
Yeah, the thing about Albrighton is blessed in that he stands out as a somewhat old-fashioned winger at a time when they're out of vogue, but also cursed because he stands out because he's an old-fashioned winger at a time when they're not in vogue. I like Albrighton. I think a little bit like Livermore, though, Chris. I think when he has a bad game, it tends to be a bit of a stinker, to be honest. But yeah. And again, I look at that Jake Livermore position, and I think I don't mean his position on the pitch, but I mean his position in the squad. And I sort of think, well, yeah, I can't really make a case against it. Put it that way. But listen, we've got to crack on, or we're in danger of going over our completely arbitrary running time we set ourselves. Attackers, wide players, I'm going to look at first. So obviously we've got Sterling, we've got Lingard, we've got Rashford, and we've got Welbeck, and that leaves us basically with Jamie Vardy through the middle. Obviously we know we can play Welbeck through the middle, we can play Rashford through the middle, but I'd be very surprised if it wasn't Vardy dead central, and then one of those four either side of him. I am accused of being way too positive about England sometimes. Sterling, Vardy, Rashford, with Lingard and Welbeck to come off the bench, knowing Welbeck is England's Lucas Podolski.
Yeah.
I don't actually think that's that bad, Chris.
No.
I think we've had worse in very recent history.
I think Rashford playing from the left and Sterling playing from the right, with one of two very good strikers in between, I think it's quite exciting as an England fan. Because Rashford and Sterling are genuine, skilled, pacey talents who can score a goal as well. And we haven't had other players like Sterling or Rashford for a while. And I think they can both play off Kane, and I think they can both play with Vardy. And I'm perfectly happy with that. Welbeck sticks out like a sore thumb in these England squads, but you just have to remember what he's there for, don't you? You can not play all season and still get in it and score.
And as much, this is the thing, as much as I'd like to criticise him, when he's in an England shirt, he rarely delivers anything less than a 7 out of 10.
Yep.
And he often scores. So... I wish we had a few more players who were better at international level than they were at club level. But I just a word for Jesse Lingard. For me, Clive, brilliant option off the bench. I'm not saying he shifts Rashford or Sterling, but 20 minutes to go when you need something up front, a player who is comfortable left or right, but who is also a massive goal threat and who has got a proven record at club level of coming up with goals in big games as well. I'm actually very, very happy about that. And I think people who think he's crap because he likes to do a handshake after he scores a goal should quite frankly get in the nearest bin. I'm pleased with Lingard as an option, Chris.
Yeah, I would have questioned him not being there. I don't really understand why he gets quite the criticism that he gets. I do, but I'm not going to say it.
I was going to say there's that side of things which is for a whole different show, but also because he represents so much of what is allegedly bad about modern football, but actually isn't bad at all.
I just don't think he represents that stuff properly either. You know, he seems like a perfectly normal footballer to me. And I think, actually, weirdly, there's a touch of the Carricks about him, in the sense that if we were to get 15 years down the line and be looking back on a player who scored 100 goals for Man United and played 10 times for England, we'd all be questioning it.
Yeah. But do you know, I'm going to pull you up on that. I don't, you know, I think there is something different about him, Chris, and I think that's that he actually looks like he's enjoying playing.
Yeah, there is that. And I think, you know, positively, he will play for England. So we won't have that same conversation with a bit of luck. And absolutely deserves to be in this squad for me.
Yeah. And when England are grinding through that first hour against Panama, trying to break down a back 10, really, really struggling, I'm quite happy with Lingard as an option, you know, and I would quite happily debate that with anyone.
Player with a neck.
The one thing I've learnt about this, Chris, as we're going on, and we are learning as we do this podcast, next time there is a squad announcement, don't bother with a question. Because looking at our run time, we may as well... Our question for this week leads into the group I've left, which is the goalkeepers, which is... Our question sort of normally this week was who starts in goal for England at the World Cup. And
almost deliberate, you'd say.
Yes. Right. Joe Hart, Jordan Pickford, Jack Butland, Nick Pope. Right. Joe Hart is a busted flush. I've said this on Twitter. The problem with Joe Hart is he still believes he has some sort of presence in goal, and he really doesn't. If you're any striker in Premier League football and you're 1-on-1 with Joe Hart, you're quite happy with that situation. You really are. He's lost the aura. He's completely... Now, I'm not saying he can never get it back, but he's just... You can see he's short on confidence. You can see he's trying the same things and getting no better results. I just think if you're about to make a case for Joe Hart, Chris, I may very well walk off this two-man podcast and leave you on your own. So for me, listen, Nick Pope has been sensational this season. Absolutely deserves his place in this squad. Absolutely deserves us looking at him. Fraser Forster has fallen off a cliff, so Nick Pope is in there completely on merit. I think we're talking about a two-horse race if we're talking about this, me and you now. Pickford and Butland. I like them both. I've got a lot of admiration for Jack Butland. It's not been his best season. But Pickford this year, it sounds a silly thing to point out really for a keeper. But his distribution has really stood out for me. He can ping a ball to attacking midfielder's feet over 55 yards with one of those ridiculous side volleys anytime you want him to. And I don't think he's technically as good a keeper as Butland, but for me at the moment that is just putting him ahead of Butland. But what's your take?
Well, tune in for next week's Heartcast. It cannot be Joe Hart. I don't know what he's doing here. For me, he's gone. Like you say, he may come back, but I just don't see it in him. If you're listening, Joe, I would love to write your autobiography with you when you're finished, because I'm fascinated by what's happened to him.
Because it's not just Pep Guardiola, is it?
No, it's not. It's been very
it really
strange.
Isn't. For somebody who likes to come out and fire themselves up and kick the posts and slap themselves in the face, he can look so thoroughly disinterested in a game at times. He's just a real mass of contradictions at the moment.
He's an interesting character because we may well look back on him and he'll be a bit of a figure of fun, and he's heading that way at the moment, unfortunately. But it's too easy to do that because he was the business for a period, Joe Hart, and it would be
it's best. We had do you remember the time, Chris, when we had the best young keeper in European football?
Yeah. And
it wasn't even close, was it?
No, and he had that little weakness that we won't identify in case Belgian team are listening. But generally, he was a very, very good, really promising goalkeeper, but he's just nosedived, and I'd love to know what's gone on there, and I hope it's just football, because it's been a precipitous decline for him. I'm broadly with you on the other two, the other three. I think, Nick Pope is the fourth of these four goalkeepers when we've been aiming three for the World Cup. And out of the other two, Jordan Pickford is my choice. I'm a fan. I think he's a very good goalkeeper. He's not perfect, but he edges Butland for me. I couldn't really get a cigarette paper between the two of them. Butland, again, is by no means perfect. We know he's got mistakes in him. We've seen them this season. And he seems to be very well schooled, very well trained as a goalkeeper. He's I guess it's the technical side of things that you mentioned, Dave.
Technician, yeah.
Pickford, I just buy him more. And I think goalkeeper's the one position where that really counts for something, because he's going to have 3 or 4 blokes in front of him that need to do exactly that. I think, Dave, if I had to put money on it, I think Butland will start that first game.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. But I do wonder if this is going to be a 2-horse race for the next 4 to 8 years. And if it is, I think at international level, that's actually quite sustainable.
Yep.
At club level, obviously, it's not at all. But then you've got Pope and Heaton coming up behind, and suddenly, I don't know, that position begins to look healthier and healthier.
Do you think Heaton's out of this, by the way, because of his injury?
No, I really like Tom Heaton. Tom Heaton, for me, funnily enough, if Tom Heaton had played all season and was at the top of his form, my answer to this question would be, I would like to see Tom Heaton in there.
Yeah, he'd be in with a shout as well.
Yeah, and I think part of that is personal experience, in that I've seen him live a couple of times and just been so impressed. But I think overall I'm just happy of that. At one point, Joe Hart was in the England squad because there was just no one else. It was just a bit of a wasteland, You still had sort of Ben Foster picking up a place in the squad without actually having to do anything to earn it. And to sort of look to the future and think, I extrapolate this way beyond this summer, and you think, well, if you were to say who's going to be in goal for the next Euros, that's a really healthy competition. That's a really healthy race, and I think that's a good place to be. Very good place to be. So I think overall, Chris, a final word on the squad. I'm not for a moment saying it's the best we've ever had, but I'm also not on board with the negativity.
Yeah, it's a friendly squad.
Why not have a look? And if we don't reward players who are playing well and reward young players with England caps, what's the point? What's the point? And I do feel some of that negativity are certain tabloid journalists who are just annoyed because they know they're not going to get a story out of Tarkowski, Mawson, Gomez, Cook, even Oxlade-Chamberlain,
Maguire.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, and they're not going to get decent copy. They're not going to get an easy 800 words like you do with a Terry, a Lampard, a Gerrard, a Beckham, a Rooney. And I do think there is a bit of that. I do think there's a bit of that in the press. But no, I'm a part. The midfield is the obvious weak spot. I think we both agree. But broadly speaking, I don't think it's too bad. Player wall time, Chris. And just to let you know, this is our longest pod by far. We're coming up on 35 minutes, so no pressure.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about the original celebrity footballer, aren't we?
We are. Yeah, I haven't really worked in the marriage into my little spiel on Billy Wright, but it's definitely a part of his story. Yeah, luckily, given that we're pushed for time, I've picked a player who just played a few times for England. He was Billy Wright was the world's first international centurion. Played 105 times for England between 46 and 59. And played hundreds of times for Wolverhampton Wanderers and was never booked for either, which is pretty impressive. And even more impressive is that he captained England 90 times. So being from the Midlands, he's a player that has long held some fascination for me. And when you look back at the landmarks that kind of justify that position, this was the leader of Winterbottom's England. He was England's captain at big moments, at pivotal moments. 1950 against the USA, the Joe Gaetjens goal, he was the captain then. 1953 against Hungary, he was the captain then. He was the captain at 54 and 58 World Cups as well. In other words, he was the England captain at our first 3 cracks at the World Cup. And this is in a team that typically featured the likes of Alf Ramsey, Stanley Matthews, Stan Mortensen, who will be the subject of this very feature before too long, I would imagine. And he was, to me, the archetype of what an old-timey England player is. It was a centre-half when it meant centre-half. He started out as a centre-forward. He played wing-half for a little while as well as a young man. And his disciplinary record is ridiculous because he was renowned for being a tough tackler. But it's an England centre-half just being a tough tackler has never been enough for me. They've always had to have that little touch of the Bobby Moores about them. And Wright was famous for his positional play, for his reading of the game, and for his passing range as well. And on top of all that, a one-club man. And who doesn't love a one-club man? I think he's underrated, underappreciated rather, by English football outside of Wolverhampton, where he's got a stand named after him and a statue outside the stadium. And I think a lot of that is, part of it is finishing before the 60s. And part of it is the fact that very sadly he died in 1994, which I think there's a case to be made that Bobby Moore, who died the year before, is... It seems weird to say that he's underappreciated, Bobby Moore, but I think they're both just slightly out of reach for anyone younger than us.
Defenders aren't sexy, Chris.
That's
what it comes down to. As you know, Chris, I can talk for hours and hours and hours about Stanley Matthews, and will do at some point on this podcast. But defenders, no matter how good they are, they just don't create the same sort of stories. And it's Billy Wright is my father was born and raised in West Bromwich, and when he talks about England players, Billy Wright is a player from his youth who just stands out like a colossus. Only ever really got embarrassed in one game. And that was a game where the whole England team got embarrassed against Hungary. And he was unfortunately part of a very, very famous goal in which Puskás, a moment of absolute genius, left Billy Wright as the fire engine going to the wrong fire, as the famous match report put it. But just a wonderful player. And if you ever read anything about Billy Wright, he was very aware of his not his lack of ability, that's the wrong way to say it, but he was very aware that he maximised everything he had through hard work, and I just enormous, never-ending, undying amount of respects for that, really.
Yeah. He's an icon for Wolves, and
right,
for me he should be an icon for us as well. And married one of the Beverley sisters, why not?
Yeah, original celebrity footballer. Right, a lot of ground covered this week. So, our next pod, we might have some actual football to talk about, mightn't we, Chris?
How about that? Our first games, Dave.
Yeah, rarity. I'm very, very much looking forward to that. But thanks for joining us. We shall speak to you soon. See you later.
Bye.